Welcome back. I got cut off just as we were talking about Richard Long. So Richard Long is a British artist, and um, he came a little bit later. And famously, the story goes that he was in graduate school, and he was working as a sculptor, going to graduate school for sculpture, and he was walking to his studio every day, and he was making pieces, actual physical pieces, in his studio space. But every day he would walk from his apartment to his studio space, and every day he'd walk across this park. And then there was a particular field in this park that was a perfectly kind of flat, even field that he walked straight across. And he started to just be interested in the idea of if he could walk, perfect straight line straight across, and could he do it every day exactly the same. And then he started to wear down this path, this perfectly straight line path right across the park. And at the end of the year, when he met with his graduate committee and he showed them the pieces he made, in his studio and his work, and then he's like, "I have one other piece to show you," and it was the piece that was the line that went across this field. That was the piece that impressed the committee and that he graduated with. Or at least that's how the story goes. And that was kind of the beginning of the work. Now he makes other pieces. He does make some pieces of, stacks and arrangements of materials, but a lot of the work he makes are these single line pieces made through walking. So the piece on the right hand side is from, I believe, from Peru. It's South America. I know that, and it's across this desert space. And I think the distance from about here to about there is something like 3 miles. So it's a pretty amazing feat to be able to walk that distance back and forth and keep such a perfect straight line. Jenny Holzer is an American artist. We're moving further into the 70s and then into the 80s. Her work began in the 70s, but definitely her career took off in the 80s. And she found another way to um, remove the form, remove the objectness from the artwork, and to make the artwork about the idea alone. And her way was to make the work text. Um, and so her work could simply just be the writing of phrases in a notebook and the handing them to people. But she found interesting ways of making them into spaces or ways of installing in spaces. So one of her early pieces is the piece on the left where she used a movie theater, the marquee on a movie theater, to put up these kind of very Jenny Holzer aphorisms. But she has done other more permanent type pieces, like the parchment pieces, and she is pretty well known for her work with LED type. Felix Gonzalez Torres is, so we're now moving way past into the 80s and into the 90s. A conceptual artist who a lot of the pieces he made were various forms of clocks. He was very interested in creating sort of collaborative pieces where in the act of collaboration, people found ways of kind of like telling time. So he was interested. He made a lot of pieces where he would make prints of artwork and then have them in a stack in a gallery. And then when people came and each person took a piece, and then that would measure a certain span of time. And then this interest in spans of time became more pressing as his partner was diagnosed with AIDS, and then later when he was diagnosed with AIDS. And so this piece, Portrait of Ross, is a type of clock. It's a portrait of Ross in that it's a clock that tells you how much time Ross has to live, the way it's supposed to work. And of course, this piece has been recreated. It's reinstalled in museums all the time. But both Felix Gonzalez Torres and Ross, his partner, have died a long time ago. But still, the pieces exist. But the way it did work when the two of them were alive was that when you went to a space, there was a sign that told you you needed to take a piece of candy, and it also said if each person who visits the gallery, based on the estimates of how many people visit the gallery or the museum, and each person takes a piece of candy, it's estimated that when the whole pile is gone, that Ross will be dead. So Martin Creed is a British artist and a much more contemporary. So a lot of the artists we've been talking about were much more part of this older tradition of conceptual art being art that was about pointing out how much art is about the idea of the thing and removing the object, removing the um, all the aesthetics except for the aesthetics of the concept. When we get to some of these more contemporary artists, especially a lot of these British contemporary, late 90s through the 2000s, 2000 teens, contemporary artists, the other definitions of conceptual art start to become more important. The idea of artwork that seems to have a strong concept to it rather than other aesthetic considerations. And with Martin Creed, the concept often seems to be about multiples and stacking. It's kind of a repeated interest of his. He's interested in just kind of like acquiring lots of things and then seeing how they can be arranged and stacking things in different ways. Gillian Waring is also a British artist, and she is a performance artist as well as a photographer. And I think that her work is not always highly conceptual, but is often very conceptual. She did a series of photographs where she had herself and her family members. She took portraits of them where they were wearing masks of their own faces. Um, and she did this, I think, also with masks of younger faces, but um, but also just masks of their faces as of right now, which is kind of a very weird conceptual thing. She Her career kind of started with this piece here, where she basically did a performance piece where she went all over England, going to train stations, and every train station she stopped at, she left the train, got her boombox radio, set it up in the middle of the station platform, and then started to dance her tuchus off um, as passionately as she could to see if anyone reacted. So Hiroshi Sugimoto, I definitely would not consider a conceptual artist, but I wanted to include him in here because you can see how the conceptual thinking that we looked at going all the way back to the 60s, that type of conceptual thinking has definitely been very influential on lots of artists, even artists like Sugimoto, who in some ways is very much a modernist and a formalist. But here, this particular body of work is very much a conceptual body of work. The idea here is that he visits lots of places in the world. He's at many cities all over the world as part of his career. And he decided that and when at every place that he would go, whether it was in New York or any city where he could see the sea, he would always go and he would photograph the sea exactly the same with the horizon exactly in the middle of the picture plane on the same large format. I think might be medium format, but I'm pretty sure it's a large format camera that he's using for this. Um, Same exact proportions every time, but the only thing that's different, of course, is atmospheric conditions. And so just all these photographs of the exact same composition, and in a way, all these photographs of the exact same thing, which is the same water and the same sky that we all see. But it's always a different thing because the body of water outside of New York City is completely different from the body of water outside San Francisco. And yet at the same time, it's the same because it's all connected. Ai Weiwei is a Chinese artist who's primarily a conceptual artist, although he does many things. And here's an early piece of his where he did kind of a performance piece where he destroyed a Han Dynasty urn that he owned, but still, it is kind of a shocking thing. He did it to kind of prove a point that China was in its rampage to or in its extreme effort to modernize everything.